Hey everybody, it's Brian Asbury, and I just wanted to welcome you to today's episode. If you could, like today's episode, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue to grow the developmentally speaking brand. Today, my guest, you may remember him from NXT UK, El Ligero. Ligero, how's it going, sir?
Not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. How are you?
I can't complain. It's been an eventful
Good,
morning, but I'm ready to
good.
do the interview.
Okay, ready whenever you are.
Let me ask you a question you've probably been asked a million times. What made you want to get into professional wrestling?
So I first saw wrestling when I was, I think, 7 years old. My cousin, who was a year older than me, was already a fan of WWF. So this will be early 90s, like 92. And my dad borrowed a VHS tape of WrestleMania 8 off my cousin because he thought that I might like it as well. And the very first match that I ever saw was Hulk Hogan and Sid Justice as the main event of that show. And obviously, I had no idea what wrestling was at that point or anything like that. But being an 8-year-old kid or 7-year old kid was just immediately drawn to just how bright and colourful everything was. And just from there, I just became more and more like addicted
Hmm.
to watching it. I guess it was like I think my parents at first thought it was one of those things as a kid that like a phase that you watch for a while and you'll maybe grow out of and stuff. But um, and I had like a little period of time when I was in my early teens where I stopped watching for about a year or so, and
Hmm.
then 1998 was obviously when like the Attitude Era was picking up and kids at school would talk about it and stuff, and that kind of reignited my desire to watch it. And it was only really when I read Mick Foley's first book that I really decided that I wanted to try and pursue looking into maybe trying to find out how to do it.
And how hard was it over there to find a good school to be able to train?
So when I started training when I was 16, there wasn't really a huge amount of wrestling schools in this country. The business in general over here didn't really seem to get like much coverage.
Hmm.
There was a couple of British wrestling magazines at the time. There was one called Power Slam that maybe covered the odd company, but again, they'd give them like real small, like column inches sort of thing. And then there was another one called, I think it was started off as WOW, which was World of Wrestling, and then it became POW, which was Power Wrestling. And they gave the business over here a little bit more attention. They had like maybe like two, sometimes 4 pages. And there was one issue where they had a various list of like contact details for
Hmm.
British wrestling companies. And again, I had no idea what even the first step would be to how to get into the job. So my dad used to have this like old word processor, and I wrote out a letter and printed it out like 10 times or something and sent off a physical copy to all of these companies. And a couple of them got back to me. A couple of them mainly plugged like their merchandise store and stuff like that.
Hmm.
There was a promoter in Britain who sadly passed away this year called Brian Dixon, who was the promoter for All Star Wrestling, who I'm sure you probably heard of.
Hmm.
And he wrote a handwritten note back to me saying that they had a show coming up at Leeds Town Hall, and Leeds is where I'm from in England. And he asked if there was any if I could offer any help to advertise the show. So I went to the box office and picked up a big stack of bill posters and went out around Leeds City Centre and bill posted and advertised the show. And then on the evening of the show, went down, met him, helped set the ring up, helped sell programs, watched the show, and I think he paid me £20, which I didn't expect to get any money
Hmm.
for it, so that was a nice bonus. Um, but they didn't really have like All Star didn't have, to the best of my knowledge at the time, anyway, didn't really have like a school. So how I actually started was there used to be a company in the south of England called NWA UK Hammerlock. They were based all the way down in Kent. And again, at the age of like 15, 16, didn't have any access to like really get down there or anything like that. Didn't have I had like a part-time job at the time. I didn't drive or anything. And luckily, they opened up an affiliate school up in Sheffield, which is sort of the next like city over
Mm-hmm.
to Leeds. So it's only about like 45 minutes away. Um, and it was a little school opened up there in a building called the 393 Club, and they were advertising it in this magazine 1 month, and you had to be 16 to go train. So like literally the week after I turned 16, which was January 2021, sorry, 2021, 2001. Um, I went down and had my first session there. There was no ring, nothing like that. Didn't know anyone. I used to
Mm-hmm.
be like a super shy like kid. I went down with my cousin because he also wanted to be a wrestler. He went to the first session and never came back, and I went every week afterwards. And even though there was no ring, it felt like the very first sort of step, the very first foot in the door, sort of thing.
How long did you train there before you
A year.
started working some matches?
So I trained there for a year. My first match was February 7th, 2002. Um, so it was about a year until I made my debut. I had no idea what I was doing, and I'm sure that's probably a real common story that you've heard like many a time. But I had no real business being in front of a paying audience. I had no character or gimmick. I had no gear or anything like that. The guy who trained us was a guy called Alan Johnson. He was a very nice guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very technically sound. Like he knew a lot of technical wrestling, but we never really got taught anything in the way of characters or psychology or how to construct a story or anything that is sort of designed there to engage like a fresh audience or anything. So we weren't ever really sort of like helped with that sort of thing, and I've never really been one with like a particularly mind for creativity in that sort of
Mm-hmm.
way. Like any merchandise that I released like throughout the years was all designed by other people because
Mm-hmm.
I just don't, that part of my brain just isn't as functional as other parts. So I had no idea what I wanted to be, and I was also the smallest guy at the school as well. And again, I was a big Mick Foley fan, and being 16 at the time, ECW was like a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
and people like I looked at someone like Spike Dudley, for example, and because at training I was the guy that the big guys would like practice moves on and throw around, I kind of just resigned myself to, oh, I guess I'm sort of like that member
Mm-hmm.
of the roster. So my very first match lasted a minute and 42 seconds, and it was pretty much a squash. And I wrestled in, I think, like bluish cargo pants, and I looked like a fan had just taken the top off and got in the ring. I had no tan. I didn't really know anything about nutrition or the gym or anything like that. Like it wasn't the best of starts,
Mm-hmm.
put it that way.
So at what point did you're working some matches here and you're developing who you are? What made you put a mask on?
So as I kind of alluded to earlier, I've always been like, oh, I was at the time anyway, like quite like shy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had no confidence in front of an audience or anything like that. And I've always had like a bit of a, and I'll just be completely honest because there's no reason not to be. I've always had like a bit of a stigma about the way that I looked. It's always been like something that I've like carried with me just from stuff in like childhood and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. It isn't anything that like I ever really like opened up about until, in fact, when I was at WWE and we filmed some vignettes about it. But basically, I was, and I'm very open and comfortable talking about it now, is that I was born with my right eye closed, and I had an operation when I was 7 to correct that. But because when I was a kid, I always looked different to like
Mm-hmm.
other kids and stuff, and obviously kids aren't exactly the most tactful when they're talking to other children. I kind of got bullied a little bit about my parents and stuff, and that always kind of stuck with me. And I think that was one of the reasons why I had no like self confidence or whatnot in front of an audience. So that was one reason, was to sort of almost provide like fake confidence, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose. Um, and the other reason was just to stand out. Like Rey Mysterio, when by the time I was starting to work matches on and when I say on a regular basis, I mean I was working like one every 3 months sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like I wasn't booked on I only worked for the one company at the time, which is the company that I started out, and they only ran like maybe a show a month, a show every 2 months sort of thing. And I was very low down in the pecking order, so
Mm-hmm.
like I wasn't working like regular matches or anything like that. And I kind of felt I needed to do something different. And like I say, Rey Mysterio debuted on WWE TV at that point, and I think it was kind of a joint decision between me and the. I think I pitched the idea first to the trainer about wearing a mask, but I think he was enthusiastic about it because like it was something that he didn't have on
Mm-hmm.
shows. There was no other masked wrestlers on the shows, and at the time there really wasn't much in the way of like masked wrestlers in the country. So it kind of felt like something that they could like put on a poster maybe or something like that. And don't get me wrong, but the first masked gear I had was like it was atrocious, was appalling quality. Like it was again, it looked like I'd made it myself at home, and not in a good way. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just awful. And it was very, very amateur looking. But again, it was like a little step in sort of the right direction. But yeah, so there's a couple of reasons why I decided to wear a mask. Some was psychological, and some was like a desire to be different to everyone else on the show.
Mm-hmm. So, do you feel like you're when you put the mask on, it got you more attention? People reached
I
out to you
think
more.
so. Yeah, I think so. Again, like I say, there wasn't really like a huge amount of masked wrestlers
Mm-hmm.
at the time. The name came from me sitting at college one day, looking through a Spanish dictionary, trying to find a word that translated into cruiserweight,
Mm-hmm.
and the closest I could find was the word ligero or ligero, which meant lightweight, and it was only meant to be a temporary thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that like I will tell you is that in my head at the time I thought I'll wear the mask for a while. I'll get some confidence in myself, and I'll I'll carry on like developing my abilities as a worker. And then when the time is right, when I feel confident enough, then I'll just go and I'll just
Mm-hmm.
do something else. It was meant to be like a stopgap sort of thing, really. But then after a while, to your point, it became something where I was different to other people on the show, and I stood out. And again, especially as like my gear got better,
Mm-hmm.
and I put more effort into the way that I looked and trained the gym more and tanned and stuff like that. It became a little bit of a selling point on shows. And the reason I say about the name is it never. We would do these shows, and I'm obviously sort of skipping ahead here quite a lot, but um, in later years in my career, like after I've been working for about 8 or 9 years, started doing all the holiday camp shows
Mm-hmm.
in England, and these are shows which are so important to the development, sorry, of wrestlers in this country. But it's full of uh, crowds that aren't wrestling fans. They're just holiday makers the wrestling is just part of the entertainment as well as all the other stuff they've got there for the kids. So they're not diehard wrestling fans.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever wrestler comes out, if you've got a crowd of like 1,000 people, you might have like 4 or 5 that know who you are, but you've got 995 who have no idea who you are. Um, and having the mask and having that something to stand out meant that people might go away from those shows and they might think, oh, I liked such and such, or I liked this guy, or I liked the one with the mask, and they
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't ever remember what my name was, but I would make an impression still, and I'd be remembered. So in that regard, it absolutely helped. I don't think I would have had the career that I had if it hadn't been for the mask. So like
Mm-hmm.
it did wonders for the entirety of my career, really.
It's really a marketable look. I mean, like you said, it does stand out. People do remember that, and that really probably helps set you apart from the rest. Was there a specific moment that you knew your career was taking off over in England?
So I'd wrestled. Oh, sorry, not the camera. So I wrestled Sami Zayn, El Generico, on a show in 2005 in front of about 40 people. And I think it was one of his first independent bookings over here. And it was the first match really that I could look at that would say was good.
Hmm.
Like I'd been wrestling for about 3 years at this point, and that was probably like my 40th match or something. So again, it's not a lot by any stretch. It was the first match that I felt was like good. And then a few months later, I was working in a company called Garage Pro Wrestling, which is now Grand Pro Wrestling, in this like storyline feud with a guy called JC Thunder, and we built this angle on ourselves, by ourselves really, because the company didn't had creative direction for some people, but not for others. So like other
Mm-hmm.
people were sort of like left to their own devices, sort of thing. And JC was this like braggadocious, loudmouth heel, and I was almost like his, because we were friends in real life. I was like his sympathetic, masked sidekick who would
Mm-hmm.
get cheers and sympathy from the crowd, but would get bullied by JC. And we built this angle where eventually I accidentally cost him like a title shot somewhere, and he turned on me. And we had this like big no holds barred match that got a lot of attention,
Mm-hmm.
possibly for the wrong reasons, from the company. It was a really bloody match. There was a lot of blood loss.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much you want me to peel back the curtain, as it were. We were specifically told no blood in this match because it's a mostly family
Mm-hmm.
crowd with a few internet fans. Um, JC, with my knowledge, obviously, went against that, and there was puddles of blood all over the floor. And the building that hosted the show, the management weren't very happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it made the match became a bit notorious because people. It was the first time I think people on the internet over here had sort of heard of who I was and who he was. So that was another kind of step up a little bit, where at least I'm in the conversation with people now. But the big one really is really long-winded way of answering your question. The big one really was 1PW, who are the source of some controversy at the moment. Their first run, um, I debuted for them in May 2006 and was kind of floating about and not doing a huge amount for them, and that's another long story in itself, and you probably don't want to be here for hours on end. But anyway, so like I wrestled El Generico on their 1 year anniversary show, and it was the Doncaster Dome, sold out, like 1,800 people. We were on first. Um, and up until 2012, when I wrestled Akira Tozawa, that was the match that I had,
Mm-hmm.
where people, like wrestlers or wrestling fans, would come up to me and said, "Oh, I saw that match that you had with Generico," and that was, I think, the first time that people thought, "All right, maybe this guy
Mm-hmm.
has some talent and can like hang with like the better independent names," and that opened a lot of doors for me as far as like being put on with like other imports. And I think I showed at the time that the companies could rely on me to, if they put me in like a bigger match situation, then I wouldn't fall flat on my face.
Mm-hmm.
So the Generico one in 2006 was like a huge stepping point for me. And I would say that was the night where I kind of like hit like the next tier of my career.
So you said it opened more doors. Did you get to travel more, do some more stuff outside of England at this point?
Yeah, sure. So, um, the company that I referenced earlier, GPW, had a kind of a working relationship with a company in Holland, called Dutch Championship Wrestling. They would bring some of their guys over, and DCW would bring some UK guys over. So there was a time period where a bunch of us were going over there like once a month, and we'd do these really good shows there. The money wasn't great, but at the time, when you're however old I was, like 19, 20, 21, um, it's not really like I had a job at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like wrestling wasn't my job, so like it wasn't like a huge thing to not make a huge amount of money off it or anything. But the weird thing is that the initial trigger for getting booked online was there used to be this website. And I can't remember what it was called. I'm sure it was called like UK Wrestler Database.net or something like that. And it was basically, as the name kind of says, it was just a list of like UK wrestlers, and it had like a picture of them and like their height, their weight, maybe like a couple of companies to wrestle for, and also their like finishing moves or trademark moves. And I guess like a company in Italy, called EWF. must have gone on that website and saw me, and this was 2005, I think. So I'd only been wrestling for 3 years at this point, and they booked me for two shows. One was in Switzerland, June 2005, I think. They booked me for a show in Switzerland on, like, say, the Friday night, which at that point was the biggest show that I'd ever done. There was 1,000 people in the crowd, and I wrestled Spud, who at the time was one of my best friends. I remember asking the promoter, because I was so nervous before. It was the first time I travelled abroad. I'm pretty sure it was the first international booking I had. It was the first time I travelled abroad for wrestling. That's a massive lie. I'll come back to that in a second. Just remembered something else. But it was the first time. It was the biggest crowd that I'd ever wrestled in front of. And I remember asking the promoter before we went out there, like, "Oh, is it going to be like a similar show, like size show tomorrow? Because we're wrestling in Rome in Italy the next night." And the promoter told me in Spud that they'd sold like 9,000 tickets or something for the next night. So when we get to the arena, and it was an arena the next night, there was like 11,000 people in there or something, which until I wrestled for WWE was easily the biggest crowd of wrestling. It was the biggest crowd of wrestling in front of for years, and I had no business at all wrestling in front of a crowd that size at that point in my career. It was like a four-way. I was looked after. Again, Spud was in it, who guided me through a lot of it, but I had no right at all to wrestle in front of an audience that size. The reason I said I was lying is I'd forgotten that JC Thunder and I had gone to America for a month in 2004 to go to the old power plant in Atlanta, and we did a bunch of shows over there. But that wasn't because I got noticed. That was us paying to go over there to train, and then doing all these terrible little shows in strip clubs and by the road next to like a chicken shack sort of thing, and a church like fake sale and stuff. And I did one show for NWA Wildside when I was over there, but it was in front of about like 10 people or something embarrassing like that. But yes, sorry. So like, yeah, 2006, 2007 was when I started to like wrestle abroad more. So like went to Italy a few times, went to Spain in 2008 for the first time, went to France for like a bunch of different times for a few different companies. Um, and you know, like I used to love traveling. I mean, you know, long days and early flights and waiting around the venues for hours and hours on end, because promoters would book you on the earliest flight possible because they were the cheapest flight possible, and they wouldn't take you to the hotel. They take you to the building, and you just sort of sit around not knowing what to do with yourself. But looking back, it's stuff like that that like I'm so lucky to have done. You know, like I think I wrestled in like 17 different countries and all these random places that I would never have gone to normally. So yeah, yeah, very lucky to have done the traveling that I got to do.
Sorry for your first experiences over here. I mean, if we set up a ring, we'll do it. That's just how it
It got
is.
better. Like every time I went back to America after that was a lot better. But that first time was, I mean, we didn't care at the
Yeah.
time. You know what I mean? Like getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to go set a ring up by the side of the road at like 8 in the morning, do like 3 matches and not got paid for a single one. And you know, like we didn't care at that time. We were just enjoying the fact that we were getting to wrestle, you know, in America or just wrestle in general. So
So you do this for a while. You're traveling. You're doing everything, and then England gets this boom of
hmm
like all eyes are on England for wrestling. How was it during that time period? Like it
just
was everywhere. It seemed like.
indescribable. Just
Hmm
like how sort of fast it seemed to happen. Like so, I would say that the first time I noticed it was two companies, I guess. So like there was PCW, which is Preston City Wrestling, Preston Championship Wrestling, one of the two. Preston City Wrestling. Um, they started. I might get my years wrong here, but I'm pretty sure they started in 2000. I want to say 11. I want to say 2011. The first couple of shows that they did was at this nightclub in Preston, and a lot of us didn't really think much to the company,
hmm
not because the booker or anything like that, but just it seemed like the wrestling was like I say, it was in a nightclub, and it felt like the crowd that were there to have something on in the background, i.e., the wrestling, whilst they were getting ready to go out on a
hmm
night out afterwards. And at the time, not that many British wrestlers were known to like adult fans because the scene was only just starting to try and like bubble up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was about 3 or 4 shows into PCW's run. They did a Christmas show, and I remember being on first in like a 6-way with like 5 of my best mates. And without sounding too arrogant, we absolutely tore the house
Mm-hmm.
down. But more important than that, it was felt like the first time that the crowd really cared, and they were starting to get into who all the wrestlers were, and it became now that the wrestling was like the main focus, and then the night out afterwards was like a bonus. So PCW, I think, had like a really big influence on like the boom, more than I think it's given credit for, in all honesty, because they were running shows like every month at this nightclub, and there was, it was packed every
Mm-hmm.
single month. And I understand the criticism is that they would bring over like XWE guys to get the numbers in and stuff. But in all honesty, the crowd
Mm-hmm.
cared way more about the British wrestlers than they did a lot of the imports that they brought over. There were some imports they brought over the crowd could not have cared less about,
Mm-hmm.
but they wanted to see the British guys, which is obviously kind of how it should be. And there was some imports, sorry, that got that, and like someone like Chris Masters, who had like such a huge hand in that company, like skyrocketing. Someone like Uha Nation, like Apollo Crews, again, someone who got it completely. And so there's like a bunch of others. Um, so like PCW was like a really big part of it, and then I would say that Progress was another really big part,
Mm-hmm.
because when I first got the email from Progress, I was on the very first Progress show in the very first Progress match. When I first got the email from Progress, the people I was going to be traveling with in the car that day, we all kind of said, well, it's just another show, really, isn't it? It's just another company.
Mm-hmm.
Going down to London was a pain in the ass at the time, because like the shows in London were never particularly great, and the travel was a nightmare, and finding the venue and driving through central London was horrendous and stuff. But either way, um, but when we got there, it felt like there was something sort of different in the air a little bit. And again, my timeline might be a little bit wrong, but I'm sure the first Progress show was 2012, I think. I think it was like late 2012 or mid 2012. Um, and it got to a point. So like, yeah, Progress had, again, the rise of Progress, and how many eyes it put on like new British wrestlers
Mm-hmm.
that weren't seen before, like a smart audience before, was really influential. And then stuff like, obviously, social media being like a massive thing, the companies that started using social media to advertise stuff like Twitter, stuff like Instagram, really helped, like, catapult a lot of people into the more public eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got to a point where, when I first started wrestling, or the first 5 or 6 years of my wrestling career, if you did 3 shows in a week, 2 of them would be in front of 40 people, 50 people, and then you do one big show that weekend, maybe, or one big show that month, maybe, and a big show was 200 people.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a point with British wrestling where if 200 people were in the crowd, that was empty. Like, it was pretty much an empty building.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere was doing so well. Um, More and more companies were doing midweek stuff, which was like a fairly newish thing. It used to just be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, except for like somewhere like All Star Wrestling or WAW or something like that would run like through the week. But for the most part, a lot of what you'd call like the independent companies were just Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then all of a sudden people started booking shows on a Tuesday all the time, or like something like WCPW came along, and then we were running shows on a Wednesday all the time. And there were times during the week where I'd wrestle like on 13 shows in a week,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is such a vast change from like wrestling 13 shows. I didn't wrestle 13 shows my first 2 years of my career, so like it was just everywhere, and it helped so much because there were so many people, and I'm sure there still are. There were so many people that were so talented that all like
Mm-hmm.
helped each other and all helped build each other up, and there were so many of us that would learn from each other. It wasn't a case of like you had 4 or 5 guys up here and then everyone else down here trying to scramble around
Mm-hmm.
for like something else. Everyone would try and boost each other up and stuff. And I guess like what's that phrase? Is it like a high tide raises all ships, something along those lines?
Mm-hmm.
A rising tide raises all ships, something like that. And that's just how it felt. And it just felt like every single show you did was, like I say, it was a rarity to go somewhere and it not be busy.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that? obviously this is what caught the eye of the WWE, that something was here.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how
There's
was
no
the
doubt.
rumblings of that? Like, how did everybody feel about that?
Um, as good as it was over here, I think everyone, rightly or wrongly, well, not even rightly or wrongly, I think it's fairly right to do so. But I think everyone wanted security of some
Hmm.
kind, like financially. It's very obviously being an independent wrestler is very much like a freelance
Hmm.
thing, where if you don't work, you don't make money.
Hmm.
And more of us were at a stage in our career where it was our jobs and it was our livelihood and it was paying our bills, but it wasn't amazing money. It was
Hmm.
good if you were smart, and it was good if you like were good with like merchandise and stuff like that. Um, but I think a lot of us like by this point, so this is let's say 2017, 2016. By that point, I've been working for like 15 years and I'd put a lot of hours in and a lot of miles and a lot of effort. Um, and I think a lot of us wanted like some sort of not reward for that, but like a payoff to it, I guess. Like, we wanted it to become a job. And then the situation with ITV came around, which I think further prompted the WWE stuff. And I don't know if you want to get into this or not, but that was a point in my career where I had both things in front of me on the
Hmm.
table, which sounds like a dream situation to be in, but was a really difficult decision to
Hmm.
make because you're getting two different offers. Did you want to discuss
Yeah.
the ITV stuff?
Yeah, that's fine.
So, so obviously we did the special,
Hmm.
like we did the one-off special, and the aim for that was to get a pilot. Sorry, the aim to get was to get a series out off of that being a pilot. Um, I got contacted by ITV, and they said we've seen how hot British wrestling is. So I guess this is 2016. We've seen how hot British wrestling is. We want to do something with it, which again was such a huge thing. And a lot of that again comes from PCW because the producers of the ITV show would go to the PCW shows and see that as like their example of like how hot British wrestling was. Um, so they said, we'd like you to come on board and do this pilot. So, oh God, what's going on here? Sorry. Um, so we don't need to obviously go into all backstory about the pilot and everything, but like, we filmed the pilot and that was great. It was a fantastic experience and everything like that. And then the show aired on New Year's Eve of 2016. I think there was like 1.8 million views or something, which I think ITV were fairly happy with, but I
Hmm.
don't think it was maybe quite as high as what they wanted. But anyway, the idea coming off the back of that was then to have a series, and then everything went quiet for a long time. Like,
Hmm.
well, things went quiet for about 3 months, and then it peaked up again with the inclusion of TNA coming on board with the partnership with Impact and stuff, and then that fell apart like really quickly, and that's not for me to say why. And I'm pretty sure Jeff Jarrett's done like podcasts on it and stuff like that, and it's his story to tell, other people's story to tell. But it all went very very quiet, and it kind of felt like a bit deflating because that felt
Hmm.
like the chance to have a career out of this. Like a bunch of us would have conversations about if we had like a series on ITV that we talked about like becoming like household names and stuff.
Hmm.
And I was always told that, like, as far as WWE goes, it was pretty unachievable for me. I'm not tall by any stretch. I'm like 5'6", 5'7". I'm 38. So at the time, I was past my 30s. I was past the age of 30, sorry. And I was always told that like 30
Hmm.
was sort of like anyone over 30 they weren't hiring. Anyone a certain height they weren't hiring. Obviously, that's changed over the years and
Hmm.
stuff, but it felt like very much a closed door for me. So the ITV thing was like a dream that I was really like holding on to, and then it all went quiet. And then about a year later, rumblings started that maybe they were looking to do a series, but at the same sort of time, they'd already done the NXT UK tournament in the United Kingdom Championship tournament in Blackpool, And anyone that did the ITV show, including myself, kind of felt a bit hard done by, because we felt if we hadn't done that, we'd been maybe doing that instead. But either way, so 2018 rolls around, and essentially, sorry, I'm really all over the place with my timeline.
You're fine.
I'll backtrack ever so slightly. I met William Regal in 2017, and this was before the United Kingdom Championship tournament. And this is the first time I'd met him. He came over to look at a few British wrestlers, like Pete Dunne and people like that. And I met him on a couple of shows, and it was the first time I'd ever been around him. And he was very, very complimentary, and he offered me a tryout in 2017. And then a week later, and I'd never had a tryout before at this point. And then a week later, he emailed me and said, "Look, I've been to watch 2 or 3 shows that you've been on. You don't need to have a tryout. The plan is to do a second Cruiserweight Classic and for you to be in that." That never happened, and that went quiet. So the WWE aspect went quiet. Then ITV got back in touch and said about their stuff. So I picked ITV over WWE. And then when ITV series never happened, and the United Kingdom Championship tournament did happen, I kind of felt that like I'd closed the door on WWE myself. Anyway, so that's a bit of important information, I suppose. 2018, I get contacted by the Progress Management, who at this point have a business relationship with WWE. I'm in a hotel room in Skegness, having done some holiday camp shows, and it's my day off. And I get an email saying, "Do you have any photos of you without the mask on?" And I'd had some taken for Regal a few months earlier. And I said yes, sent them, and asked why. And they said, "We're in a meeting with Triple H at the moment, and we're looking at British guys, and your name's come up." I said, "Okay, well, please keep me in touch, sorry." In the same week as this happening, ITV got in touch and said, "We've got the green light for a series." And again, it's like, right, okay. So I'm at that same crossroads. It's like, right, I don't know which one I want to do. In the end, I was given the choice of both. They both made offers. Now, a few of us were in the same boat where the WWE deal was, I think, a 24-month. It might have been 12. Either way, let's say it was 24. A 24-month deal, but they could take the deal off the table after, I think, 4 months. So you had a 4-month guarantee, I believe. ITV was the contract for the series. So the crossroads that you're at is I could turn down the series of ITV, which might end up being a massive success, and sign with WWE, but I might only work for WWE for 4 months, and then they might release me once I've missed the series filming for ITV. Yeah. So it's a real difficult situation to be in, and there's no guarantee either way of which one's going to be a success. But I turned down WWE once, and I'd grown up watching it, and I had a few other circumstances that sort of pointed me in that direction. And I agreed to sign with WWE in May of 2018, I think. So that's a really long-winded version of that story.
So how was your time in NXT UK?
A mixed bag. A mixed bag. So I've never actually, this obviously I've not something I've ever really spoken about, to be honest, publicly anyway. So, for the first thing I'll say is that the majority of people there that worked there, that wrote there, that were the cameramen there, that were the crew there, were the staff there, were fantastic. I have no qualms whatsoever about the people that I was around, the people that I worked with, the people that I worked for. Everyone was very pleasant. I look back on my time at NXT UK and WWE in general with a lot of positivity, because it allowed me to do a lot of stuff that I never thought I would get a chance to do. So getting to wrestle in New York City over WrestleMania weekend for WWE was a huge thing for me. Getting to just wrestle at Access, getting to even just be at Full Sail for NXT, going to the Florida Performance Center, all the stuff we did at the UK Performance Center. Very, very lucky to have done the things I got to do. Shawn Michaels was my idol for a
Mm-hmm.
really long time in wrestling. To be able to sit with him, just me and him, and like watch stuff back, or to just talk um, about stuff, was about my character and things I could work on and stuff like that, was again a huge, huge thing for me. And I think I remember wrestling at Royal Albert Hall, which again is a phenomenal building, and again like a real dream place to work. And I remember coming to that, and it was only a dark match. I remember coming backstage from the match, and the first two people that spoke to me were Triple H and Shawn Michaels, and they were both so positive about the match and about my work and stuff. And I remember texting one of my friends and saying like I could pretty much retire now. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's such a big thing for me to like have those two people like give me like the feedback and be positive and stuff. The one thing I will say, or one thing I'll say really, is I wish I'd have enjoyed it more rather than constantly being in my own head about things there. So I have the tendency, unfortunately, just as a human being, to overthink stuff and catastrophize things and think worst case scenario. And at this point in my career, I think I was regarded as like one of the sort of upper tier guys.
Mm-hmm.
But there was stuff that there was. I found that I questioned myself a lot when I worked there. Um, whether that's down to their system, whether it's down to my own insecurity, whether it's down
Mm-hmm.
to my own lack of self-esteem, maybe a mixture of all of it. I don't know. But I remember like me and someone else who I won't name, like would sit in the hotel swimming pool every night when we were at the PC, and would pretty much vent about like being frustrated at like, well, how come? Unfortunately, I and this other person fell too much into the trap of, well, why are they getting that, and like
Mm-hmm.
we're not getting this, and we've worked just as hard and stuff like that. And the first year I was there, I felt that like the management like were very high on me. Like I got a lot of wins on TV. I got like pushed. I got a few main events. I got like vignettes. I got taken out to like say New York. Got taken out to Phoenix for the Royal Rumble. Like did all these amazing things. And then it felt at some point there was a bit of a shift, and I think that I was too zoned in on trying to find something that would work rather than like, and I know it's a cliche, but it's like trusting the process. I feel that I was maybe too. I tried to pitch like storylines quite a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and a lot of the time it would fall on deaf ears. And I feel that like I was maybe a bit too much of a. I worried too much rather than just like taking what they gave me,
Mm-hmm.
doing the best of my ability, clocking in at work, and then moving on. Um, and I think the problem was like, and this is like another conversation in itself, but like wrestling was like my entire life. I had nothing outside of wrestling, and that always was like a bit of an issue for me. I didn't have like the balance that I should have done. So like every friendship I had was tied into wrestling. Every relationship I had was tied into wrestling. Everything that I did, thought, said, felt was all tied into wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can only wrestle for that one company, and you don't have that balance elsewhere, when the things aren't going the way you want them to go in that company, it can take like its toll on you a bit too much, and you can get in your own head about it. And I find that like I wouldn't say that I ruined the experience for myself,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that like I should have tried to enjoy it more than I did. And
Mm-hmm.
don't get me wrong, like some bits just weren't enjoyable. Like nobody wants to be taking back body drops at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning in a cold warehouse when you've been resting for like nearly 20 years. um, that's just awful. But it's part of the
Yeah.
job, and I should have just basically accepted that and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. Um, there's a lot of obviously other like things that I could like talk about my time there. And I think it's a shame though that like I didn't embrace more of the positive aspects of it
Mm-hmm.
rather than like worrying too much about like when will the next positive thing be, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And I don't want to make it sound like I had a miserable
No.
time there. I really didn't. I really, really didn't. I was very, very grateful for the job there. I was making good money. I was surrounded by fantastic talent and amazing crew. We were all very, very looked after. um like I know there's jokes online about like the money being horrendous and it being like a little warehouse in Enfield and stuff like that, but everyone works so hard, and it was like a very, very positive atmosphere a lot of the time. Unfortunately, there were aspects of the system that I think made you question your own ability and question whether you were doing the right things or not. And I think a lot of people in wrestling uh, have like insecurities and
Hmm.
self-esteem issues and stuff. And somewhere like that, if you don't look out for it, can magnify them. And unfortunately, I allowed myself to fall into that trap, I guess.
Hmm. I don't think a lot of people realize, just like developmental in general,
Hmm.
there's a lot more people there than what they advertise, what
Sure.
they show. Like I think right now they said there's like 150 people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's way wait. What are you gonna do with 150 people, and how are you gonna develop 150 people?
I think
That w- yeah.
everyone's fighting for spots as well. I remember we did Download Festival the second year, and the writer of NXT at the time, and I can't remember his name now, like he stood in front of the entire roster and basically read out like these are the TV matches for the weekend, and I was the only person that didn't have a TV match that week. And you've been told by one person, you've been told by like the booker or one, oh, Shawn Michaels loves your work, thinks you're fantastic. But then at the same time, you've been told by the writer, yeah, but you're not on TV. And
Hmm.
because that's like 2 months of TV filmed in, I think it's 2 months anyway, filmed over that weekend. And so that's or at least a month. That's at least a month's worth of TV that I'm not going to be on. And TV time is obviously like
Hmm.
important. And it's stuff like that. I mean, there was a reason for it, and I did end up working a TV match that weekend because it's changed some stuff because of injury. Um, but it's stuff like that. Do you think that's the sort of stuff that makes you question your own ability and whatnot? And it's like, well, I'm so used to being like such a busy pro wrestler, like throughout my independent career, to now like working like
Hmm.
once a month or once every 2 months or something like that. That you can start, you kind of like start mentally like crawling the walls a little bit with it.
Hmm. So NXT UK had its run. Did
Sure.
you guys know ahead of time that it was coming to a close, or was it out of nowhere?
Yeah,
Was it
so
a temporary,
well, this is the elephant in the room, I suppose, about doing these sort of things, about doing podcasts. So by the time NXT UK closed down, I didn't work there anymore.
Hmm.
Like I got released about a year before they closed. I got released in 2020 because of personal problems
Hmm.
myself that I
Yeah.
brought up upon myself. That wasn't anything. It was no one else's fault or
Hmm.
anything like that. It's something that, like, to this day, 3 years later, I'm still completely accountable for
Hmm.
and completely responsible for. It was personal problems that were long embedded in me psychologically that like I failed to get a grip of and failed to be responsible for, and like sought out therapy and did a lot of work on
Hmm.
myself afterwards to try and be a better person and try and like take my life in a more positive direction. And it's not necessarily a rabbit hole that we necessarily need to go down.
No.
But at the time they closed down the brand, like I didn't. I was in no contact
Hmm.
with WWE at that point. I got released in June 2020. I think the last time I spoke to them was maybe like December 2020 or something like that. Like I kept in touch with a couple of the
Yeah.
management. I think I'd maybe asked, is this a closed door sort of thing? And I was, told, it's never a closed door, but we'd have to see where things are
Hmm.
in a couple of years. And by that point, I'd started to build like a new life for myself and started to stray away from wrestling and
Hmm.
focus on a more positive avenues in my life and stuff where I thought I could make more of a positive difference to people, and stuff that was more beneficial for me
Hmm.
mentally and trying to like stay in wrestling, if that makes sense. So I have no idea like what the mood was like
Hmm.
when they shut the brand down. I spoke to people. I'm still in touch with like some people from there.
Yeah.
Like some people I'm still friends with and stuff. And it's not. I remember seeing everything on Twitter, and it was not nice when you're seeing like your friends and stuff like losing the jobs and losing their income and stuff like that. And it's obviously really unfortunate. Um, a lot of them have done really well since, and a
Hmm.
lot of them have like really like made strides back on the independent scene and stuff. So like I'm a very, very big believer in things happening for a
Hmm.
reason. Um, whether that is like those people like losing the jobs to then like have like a reigniting of their independent career,
Hmm.
or me losing, my position there in order to go away and fix myself and stuff
Hmm.
like that. So yeah, so I couldn't comment on how the mood was or anything like that.
So what are you up to today? How's everything
So
now?
everything is good, a lot better than what
Hmm.
it was 3 years ago. So when I got released, we were in the lockdowns over here because of COVID,
Hmm.
and
Horrible time.
that was, yes. And I started studying to be a personal trainer during the lockdowns, not because it's something I wanted to do as a job, but
Hmm.
because I needed something to focus my mind on. I just lost my dream job again through my own actions. I just started therapy, and I lost a lot of friendships, that I had to work really hard to sort of both get over and try and work through and stuff like that. So I started studying to be a personal trainer as just a means to sort of take my mind off things and to try and like put a positive focus
Hmm.
on some stuff rather than just, obviously we couldn't go out, we couldn't do anything, couldn't really see people. I didn't want to just sort of sit and ferment and overthink and stuff like that. So I started studying to be a PT. Really enjoyed the process. I enjoyed learning. Fitness has been a big aspect of my life for a lot of my wrestling career. And I enjoyed. I obviously had a bunch of wrestling schools over the years and stuff like that, and I always enjoyed seeing people that like I'd helped develop like achieve things, and I would always, regardless of the personal issues I had, I would always try and get my trainees as much work as I
Hmm.
possibly could. So I enjoyed seeing them like do well for themselves. So yeah, I started doing that, and then I started working at a gym. When we came out of the last lockdown, I qualified as a personal trainer, and I've worked there for about 2.5 years, and that's my life now. That's my job. It's something that I love doing. I'm very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about helping people. It's nice to have a job that is so rewarding, but where
Hmm.
I'm not the focal point, because
Hmm.
obviously being in wrestling for so long, I was always, the focal point, the person in the spotlight, as it were. It's nice to not have that now, and I feel more comfortable like that. I still get offers every now and then, for wrestling stuff. Um, we're in a tough, or I'm in a tough spot, as it were, as in, there's stuff that I get offered where I think, oh, maybe I could do that because I'm still in shape. And I mean, I've not been in the ring in about 2 years, but I'm still in shape and whatnot. But then is it worth the stress, or is it worth the hassle of, because you don't know how people online are going to receive
Hmm.
it, or how people online are going to take it and stuff like that. And is it worth the hassle of that sort of thing, or should it just be something that's just completely in, the rearview mirror in my life? So, I'm open to the idea of possibly taking stuff, but at the same time, like, I'm really happy with what I'm doing now, and things are really positive for me, uh, in that
Good.
in that aspect of my life.
Good. Let me ask you one final question, sir.
So,
If you could give anybody advice getting into professional wrestling, what would it be?
um, so the biggest problem that I had, not that this podcast should be a therapy session. The biggest
It's
problem I
healthy.
had, well, that is true. The biggest problem I had is that wrestling is very much like a bubble. It's very, very much like a bubble. One of the best analogies I ever heard about wrestling was, and it might not be like this anymore, but if you've ever seen the film Pinocchio, the island where all the boys get to go and play and do whatever they want, and without any consequences, and the longer they stay there, they become jackasses. So I think
Hmm.
that's a really smart analogy for wrestling. And again, I've not been involved in it for a while. It might be a lot different to that now, and if it is, that's great. But it's still very much like, a bubble, and it became a lot easier for me to ignore the self-esteem issues that I had, the psychological issues that I had, um, it became a lot easier to ignore the real life things that needed working on, and it became a lot easier to just delve deeper and deeper into that bubble where I could pretend to be somebody else,
Hmm.
where this character that I've created doesn't have to deal with that sort of low self-esteem. This character that I've created is the center of attention, is the focal point of each day, each show, etc., etc. And ultimately, that was an unhealthy way for me to approach life. So I guess if wrestling can be very, very all-consuming,
Hmm.
and I don't think I would have achieved the things I achieved in it if I hadn't have delved so deep into the bubble and committed so much of my life to it. But I think that wrestling might not always be there in your life, but hopefully your life will always be there without wrestling.
Hmm.
So I feel that like the advice I would give to people is try not to get sucked too deep into the bubble. Try to have things outside of it and try to have balance in life, because if everything in your life is wrestling and wrestling is either going poorly or it gets taken away from you, you'll suffer the consequences mentally more than anything else. So I think like having some balance and having something away from it is vital in order to
Hmm.
survive within it.
Absolutely. Where can people reach out to you at?
Uh, Nowhere really. I mean, I still have like a Ligero Instagram, as you know, but like I very, very rarely use it.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm gonna keep my personal trainer one
Good.
like away from the public eye in that regard. Just I don't I just want to be left alone. Um, so yeah. I mean, like I say, I still have the Ligero Instagram. People are more than welcome to. Every now and then, I'll get a nice message on there from someone, and
Hmm.
I'll reply and stuff like that. And it's nice to be appreciated still for stuff that I did in the past.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess the Ligero Instagram. I don't have Twitter anymore because it's a cesspool,
Hmm.
and I don't really use Facebook or anything like that. I try and stay off the radar as much as I can these days because I spent so fucking long
Hmm.
on the radar. So Ligero Instagram is fine.
Well, I appreciate your time today, sir. I appreciate everything you've done for professional wrestling.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for taking the time out. If there's anything
Thank
I
you.
can ever do, feel free to reach out.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you for asking me to do it as well.